All right, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some other people may still be coming in, but I want to go ahead and get started so we can hear all this excellent information that Kazue is going to bring to us today. Once again, welcome to Cyndy McDonald's Friday Forum on Cultural Competency and why it's important in educational advising. A little bit of background about myself. I'm Kathy Griswold-Fine, and I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. While we're waiting for more people to come in, why don't you all go ahead and put into the chat where you're from? I have a master's degree in special education and a PhD in education, and I've been in the educational space for about 20 years, about 10 of which has been as a college counselor. I did complete the UCLA extension, and recently, thank you to Cyndy and her study groups, I earned my CEP. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and first of all introduce Carmen. Carmen, can you introduce yourself to us, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carmen, and I'll be monitoring the chat. I'm currently in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I'm on my second year of studying environmental engineering.
Thank you so much for helping us today, Carmen. And again, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Kazue McGregor.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. Well, let me first of all welcome all of you here, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule right now during the application season. I totally get that. So first of all, I gave a nod to the University of Charleston. That is the picture behind me. I had another picture, but I thought in Los Angeles, we have had terrible heat this past week. You might have heard about it, maybe in the rest of California as well. So this brings a little bit of cool thought. And so anyway, that is what that is. I am Kazue McGregor, certified educational planner, and I own and am the founder of Exploring College Choices. And today I want to share with you the cultural competencies as it relates to educational advisors. Now, some of you may be independent, some of you may be school counselors, but in any case, I really feel that this is something that I'm personally passionate about. I was born in Japan. I came to the United States when I was 7, and my mother and I were first generation immigrants. And my father, he was born here, but raised in Japan. So he's what is called Kibe. So he was third generation, but definitely first generation mentality. So when I came here to the States, I was steeped in a very, very traditional Japanese home. And I will share with you bits and pieces of my personal story as I go through my presentation today, because I want you to understand that this is my personal story that I want to share and how I have drawn in cultural competencies in my own practice, but also in educating parents and other advisors. So and I wanted to also mention that there is such a rich resource on this topic. Recently, I attended the NACAC Guiding the Way to Inclusion, the GWI conference. I can't tell you how invaluable that was. So if you get a chance to check that out in the future, please do. I never saw and heard so many perspectives, and it really broadened my own learning. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and start. And let me just tell you the format. So I'm going to go through and just talk about what is cultural competencies in educational advising. I will also present 2 case studies. And then after that, I will leave room for questions at the end, which thankfully Kathy and Carmen are going to monitor, because I'm not going to look at them at all until the end. So let me get started here. So I think it's important for us to just begin, what is culture? And start with that basic understanding. So culture refers to the behaviors, language, customs, arts, morals, knowledge, and beliefs of a particular group of people. And this group could be of a national, racial, ethnic, religious, geographic, age-related, or other social nature. And Not all individuals within any group can be defined by that group's perceived cultural norms. So that's all of the official definition of what is culture. I think all of us, whether conscious or not, we all have implicit or unconscious bias, and I include myself in that too. When we make decisions or take actions imposing our understanding of a group's culture on an individual that you believe falls within that group, that's an assumption. And that could, whether favorably or unfavorably, influence our behavior. Nobody is immune, but there are things, that's why we are here today, to remind us to be mindful how to improve, in our cases, as education advisors, our service to our families. Okay, so let's just first take a look at when we fail to understand cultural differences, what does it lead to? Sometimes it can lead to unintended confusion and misunderstandings. And drawing on my own personal story, I can tell you that in my family, talking about money in front of children, that was taboo. So drawing on that knowledge, when I meet any family, I always ask, if I have not already spoken to the parents about my fees, I will always ask, would you like the children or students to be excused when we next discuss fees? And most of the time, the parents will tell me it's fine, but I have had half a dozen times where the parents appreciated that and said, yes, please. So that is one small way of understanding that without understanding the culture, you might actually be offending them. This first slice of pie, there are many cultures, and I include the Japanese and many other Asian cultures, where they hesitate to ask questions even when they don't totally understand what you have said, because it's impolite. And that is something that might seem very frustrating because, you know, I have lived here since I was 7, so I consider myself thoroughly American. And it's hard for me to think, well, if they didn't understand, and I've asked them, do you understand? They will say, yes, they understand. But as I get to know the family and their cultural background and their understanding of what is polite, what is accepted, I will start to modify my behavior. In other words, I will ask 3 times, different times in the conversation, in different ways, just to make sure that they feel it's safe, that I am really sincere when I ask them, does that make sense? Do you understand that? And it's really okay if you don't. Same way, you know, in Japan, in the language, there are more than 30 ways to say you. Right? I mean, that alone is so indicative of one culture where throughout the conversation, there's a constant gauging going on to judge and make sure that the values, the respect, and all of that is ongoing. So when we come to the word no, oh my goodness, that might just not even exist, that you would never say no. There would be other ways to say that. The second slice on the right, your innocent remarks or actions, it may be unintentional, may insult or anger a family from a different culture. It may also arouse suspicion of Western attitudes and resistance to following your advice. And finally, cause misunderstandings and create barriers to delivering correct information. My father, who had gone to college in both Japan and in the US, once told me that in the US, it was not so hard to get into a university, but boy, was it hard to graduate. And by comparison, he said, you know, in Japan, getting into college starts in kindergarten, and it just goes all the way through their entire schooling. The goal of a family, the entire group, is get into a college, get into a good college. because that guarantees the job. Now, how do you get into a good college? It is all based on numbers, your GPA, your test scores. So you can only imagine those immigrant families, first generation, second generation even, who came here to the United States when during COVID, the standardized testing became optional. It really drew lots of confusion. How were students going to be judged? How evaluated? How are they going to know? And it gave me the opportunity to really, again, talk about the different evaluation process, the holistic evaluation here in the United States. So getting into college meant that it was crucial that we look at how the next 4 years were going to matter so that the student could thrive and graduate in 4 years. As opposed to, according to my father anyway, he said, once you got into college, oh, you could do anything, you'll graduate. So I thought, okay, now I don't know if that's still true or not, but I do see that attitude reflected sometimes in my families. So in our work as education advisors, the definition of cultural competency is the ability to effectively deliver services that meet our family's social, cultural, and linguistic needs. That allows us to provide understanding and support to our families based on their racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to know everything. No, this is part of the process today. The fact that you're here today is already a huge step in opening your mind, opening your doors to continual learning. What this allows us to do is improve the quality of our service and showing families that we truly care. And when they have that experience, they're more likely to share their experiences with other families. I think all of us want to provide superior service to all families, regardless of different cultural backgrounds. So I want to talk first about first generation students. We don't always think of them as part of the cultural competency. A formal definition of a first generation college student is a student whose parents did not complete a 4-year college or university degree. Yet there are nuances, and depending on the college, they do define that slightly differently. What about post-secondary experiences of extended family members or older siblings or important adults in their lives? Does that make a difference for that student's experience? I want to talk to you about Rachel. So Rachel, a senior in high school, was accepted to a very highly selective private 4-year liberal arts college with substantial merit and need-based aid. Practically the whole thing was paid. She was the first and only child in her family to attend a college in the United States. Her parents attended a university in their home country, Colombia, but here in the United States, her father was working as a janitor and her mother was a homemaker. And since they had only moved to the US 6 years earlier, their English was quite broken. And Rachel oftentimes served as the primary interpreter in our meetings. When she was accepted, she was over the moon. But then her parents got cold feet and they wanted her to live at home and not attend this college, which was located 40 miles away from home. Because back home, girls didn't leave home to go to college. They stayed home until they were married, or they went to college, but they stayed home and commuted. So just take a moment and think, how would you approach this family? Now, I presented this case at a recent HECA Professional Development Institute, and we had a very lively discussion. And of the 20 plus students who were there or college advisors who were there, they came up with lots of different ideas. And I wrote these down. Work with a school counselor. Find a trusted adult who could act as an interpreter and really explain to the parents what this opportunity was. Ask what their concerns were or are, and then listen. Explain the value of a small liberal arts college. Explain what a residential life experience is like and what Rachel would gain. And most importantly, develop trust. And I bet most of you hit all or many of these already on your list. But here's the outcome. So the college advisor first met with both parents and then took the mother out to tea to build a trusting relationship. And the entire time she just listened, did not talk about the college, did not even talk about the process. I'm going to say we, because if you haven't guessed already, this was a former student that I worked with. So we basically talked instead about our families, our children, and our experiences, in our case, the shared experiences of being an immigrant. And it was just listening and sharing. Then once the parents trusted me, I agreed to go to the college campus with them. And I met the school officials, and between Rachel and me, we helped communicate, most importantly, the safety information in the financial aid process. And thankfully, after all the questions were answered, the parents finally felt safe in sending Rachel to this small college. And I will share with you, it's not on the slide, but at one point during the tea, the mother suddenly changed topics and said to me, if Rachel was your daughter, would you send her? And I gave it just a brief moment of thought, and I said, yes. And I felt a weight of responsibility when I said that, but I also felt confident that Rachel was going to be totally capable of succeeding and thriving. And as you can see, she did attend the college with her parents' full support, graduating in 4 years with honors in economics. And she is currently employed by a successful management consulting firm not too far from her parents' home. So I want to talk about misconceptions about first-gen students. And this was taken from the Center for First-Generation Student Success. The first myth is all first-generation students are low income. But the fact is, about 40 to 50% are low income, but not all first-generation students are. Another myth, all first-generation students are non-white. Not all first-generation students are from a minority, racial, or ethnic background. 3, that they are not academically prepared somehow. Reality, many first-generation students are incredibly bright, hardworking, and resilient, and they bring their rich experiences and contributions in the classroom. I feel like I'm already talking to the choir because I know you have all worked with students just like these. The last myth is that they don't have supportive families, that their parents didn't want them to go to college, or that they're angry that they're going to be going away. And here, there's a wide spectrum. You cannot draw a general conclusion, as you have all found. So really, it boils down to what can we do? So by definition, first-generation students have less people in their life to depend on or to go to get advice about the college process. So they may lack the critical cultural capital necessary for college success. It's a challenge for all students to navigate the tangled web of college policies, procedures, jargon, expectations, right? But in particular, first generation students, it's a challenge. It is baffling, it is confusing. And if they don't get connected to some support on the campus itself, some first generation support program, it is very, very challenging for them to navigate this. So this is what I call the hidden curriculum, the curriculum that nobody really teaches them. It can damage their confidence. Here they were, coming from a high school where they had so much support, and they were the leaders of their student association. They come here and suddenly they're not that anymore. And so oftentimes first gen dropouts are because of this lack of support or connection. So then we as advisors, and also for the colleges, it provides an opportunity to provide that additional support so that they can be as competitive and successful as their peers and really become the best versions of themselves. So if you have first generation students that you have been working with, I wouldn't be surprised if you stay in touch with them or that they email you. And just that alone means the world. When I graduated from high school, it was one individual who convinced my parents to allow me to attend a college that was still close enough to home so that I could still live at home, which was non-negotiable, but it was a larger four-year institution. And that person was my high school guidance counselor. And he came to our home and he spoke to them. And it was that one-on-one trust that gave them the confidence to allow me to go further away. And then a year later, allow me to even try to go to a school on the East Coast. So that's a long story in itself for another talk and day. But I can completely relate when I encounter families facing these similar situations. Next, I want to touch upon the Asian American and Pacific Islander. And I'll have a case study for that as well. So AAPI college students experience a number of stressors that are particular to the AAPI community. It has to do with racial discrimination, but also pressures to conform to stereotypes. AAPI college students are the least likely racial ethnic group to seek out mental health services because of culturally specific stigma and other structural barriers. I'm glad to say that things are slowly, very slowly starting to open up in Asia about just even being able to talk about mental health. But I know even when I was growing up, and if there was a family member, a distant family member experiencing any kind of hint of mental illness, it was not to be spoken about. And I don't think it's just in the Asian culture. I do believe, and I'm sure you know, of other cultures which have the same similar stigma. So due to that, the Asian American families deal with mental illness within the confines of their family unit, and they are reluctant to seek the help of any professionals outside the home. So it's important to understand that when we speak about AAPI, we're not talking about one subculture or two or even a dozen. There are over 50 different ethnic groups. But according to the National Policy Institute, the AAPI students are often left out of conversations when speaking of students of color and are seldom recognized in academic research. Back in 2018, the census or the survey, approximately 22.6 million Asian Americans lived in the United States. The top 4 subgroups were the Chinese, Asian Indian, Filipino, and Vietnamese. I was personally surprised to find the Filipino community was actually the third largest in the US. And the reasons go back to colonial history and so forth, so on. But really, it was just an interesting observation for me. And I determined at that time that I needed to find out more about the Filipino culture, because here in Los Angeles, where I practice, there are many Filipino American families. The newer wave of Asian Americans and refugees from Southeast Asia comprise 13% of the population, with the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander groups making up less than 1%. So in May of 2021, we were still in COVID, there were increasing reports of anti-Asian hate crimes. And the Steve Fund and the National Center for Institutional Diversity got together a group of experts in AAPI history, college students, and mental health experts to really delve into what could be done. And they came out with a long report of recommendations to address the misunderstood needs and historical and sociocultural understanding of AAPI communities in the US. And I do believe the slides will be available. So these links that you see here could be also accessed. So here's my case study. Filipino American parents, they never disclosed that David had been diagnosed with high functioning autism in kindergarten. And they never told his school, they never told the other members of their family. Throughout his school life, I mean, David was naturally bright. He got through kindergarten and elementary school and middle school. And then he entered high school, and suddenly he started having issues. Now, he did not receive any accommodations, which he was entitled to under the US Federal Act ensuring access to special education for eligible children with disabilities. He probably would have had to have a newer and more recent evaluation since he was diagnosed in kindergarten, but more than likely he would have qualified. Again, David was a bright student, but he started to have to spend 6 hours a day on his homework. And his parents thought he was lazy. They wouldn't accept that that was due to actually his learning disabilities. And so by the time they went to a college advisor in order to help them navigate the college application process, his GPA had plummeted. He was displaying violent behavior. And so my question to the PDI group was, how would you approach this family? This is a very, very complicated situation. And I know Kathy, I don't know if you want to jump in here, but Kathy is an expert. I mean, this is her specialty. And when I saw and read about her background, I thought, oh, this should be very interesting.
Yeah, that's a tough situation for sure. And I've been in these situations where I have a family that, you know, from a cultural perspective, it's really difficult to get them to engage regarding anything that stigmatizes, their perception of stigmatizes their child. And it's hard. And it's sad for this young man, because it could have been different, right?
It could have been different. Absolutely.
Yes. So what do you do with this family? I think that your personal approach, like taking the grandmother to tea, was a really great idea for the last student, but you know, maybe making that sort of personal connection again, and educating them, teaching them about what they're entitled to, what their son's entitled to, and helping them see that that's like the first step to helping him be able to become an independent adult.
Yeah.
And then helping him find a college where, frankly, they're able to work with him.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And those were some of the same suggestions that the PDI group came up with. Understanding the stigma. First of all, you have to understand the background, right? The stigma associated with mental illness in their community and the reluctance to meeting the parents, listening and explaining about what are accommodations that are available to them for free, and that if they wanted those accommodations in college, it would really be helpful to demonstrate that he had been receiving it during high school. Working with a school counselor, that was important, and providing information on mental health support. So thank you, Kathy. I mean, that's right, exactly what everybody else thought too. And this is what came about. So the college advisor spoke to the parents many times to explain the federal act and the importance of demonstrating a history of learning disability support. After months, the parents finally overcame their shame and fear and went to the school counselor and worked out a 504 plan with the school. Unfortunately, he was already a junior at that time, so by this time he was already a senior. So it was a little bit too little, too late. However, their insurance plan allowed for a weekly in-home family therapy, because by this time things were getting pretty ugly at home.
Sure.
Yeah. Even though David then though was able to be admitted to an incredibly selective four-year research university, he brought up his grades in that last final bit, but it was a struggle. And he had not already established advocacy, self-advocacy,
right. Strategies.
Exactly. It was just too late. And so he ended up dropping out. He is currently employed, but I think things could have been different. Now, the good news, the silver lining, is that his younger sister, Joy, had also been part of that weekly family therapy for that year. And she saw and witnessed the difference. So the great thing is, she decided that when she went to college, she wanted to major in psychology, become a therapist like this woman who had helped their family, and she wanted to focus on helping other Filipino American families.
And that is good. I feel it's a sad thing for David though.
It was. You know, I got to know this family really well, and truly, David had this talent that nobody ever told him. He was a great artist. I mean, my goodness, it wasn't something that he was proud of because he had never been told that that was a talent. But when it came to making graphic design for something, for his club, for his ASB, it was phenomenal. He just went over the top. And yet, of course, he had to go into STEM because that is what was prevalent as important. I sometimes wonder if I'd been able to start with David much earlier,
Right.
who knows what would have happened. You know, maybe he would have been a graphic designer and doing something he truly loved doing. But, you know, we can't second guess ourselves. And truly, we can just do our best with what we have at the time. And I think the waves of, like the silver lining I mentioned, sometimes we don't know what that they will be until much later.
And it's not too late. I mean, maybe at some point he, starts taking community college classes and chipping away at a degree. It's not too late, as you know.
Yeah. Thank you. So here are some misconceptions about Asian American students. Myth number one is that all Asian Americans are the same. And now you know that that's not true. There's a wide variation among the various ethnic subpopulations. Second myth is that Asian American students are not really underrepresented racial minorities, and they don't struggle academically and are not educationally disadvantaged. Asian American college students experience a number of stressors, some of them being racial discrimination, pressures to conform to stereotypes, and this last one, struggling with navigating multiple cultures. Now, I don't know if that's specific to Asian American culture, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, that was huge. That was really huge. I think in my early 20s, I went through a whole self-identity struggle. Am I Japanese or am I American? What am I? Am I going to be able to speak to my parents in a certain way? No, never. I can't do that. And yet I had to change when I went out because if I were to speak to my friends and others in the same way, I wouldn't get ahead, or I wouldn't be understood even. I still struggle with that.
Code switching. It's called code switching. You have to modify yourself and how you communicate depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I do think it's universal to some extent. And the last myth is Asian American students are most successful academically and professionally. And again, we find out that certain subgroups within the Asian American community actually hold high school graduation and college degree rates far below the national average. So I think NACAC is doing a great job of really promoting and supporting that awareness.
Is there a link on your slides to the conference that you went to recently? Was that on there?
Yes, it's actually, I think, the second or third one from the top.
Perfect.
When we get to the last one. Yes.
Guiding the way in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Carmen.
Thank you.
The bodiless voice, everybody. That's Carmen doing all the busy work.
About the misconception about Asian American students being more successful academically. My own daughter is adopted from India, and she's got pretty profound learning disabilities. She's a junior in college right now, and she's sort of had to sort of deal with everybody making assumptions that school's easy for you, so therefore you're going to do well. It's been interesting to watch that as an outsider.
Oh, I bet. That's right. Absolutely. I can even go on and on about more myths about Asian Indians, but I'm not going to do that because I want to make sure that we leave enough time for any questions from the audience. I only have a few more and then we're done here. So how does cultural competency influence the working relationship with families? Well, as you've already started to gather, how we present how families present their problems to us, their situations and information can vary depending on their culture. How education and the college admission process are perceived? Definitely. As I mentioned, what my father said about as long as you get a certain number and you're, number so-and-so, then you go to that college. Wow, right? If it were that simple, but on the other hand, do we really want that? Behaviors of clients seeking your services and their attitudes towards you can be different. Different family personal beliefs, systems, and how families respond to your advice and service plans can be very, very different depending on who they are. Okay, let me move on. So the pillars to build, I call it CAS, knowledge, seek information, just seek information. We're all constantly learning. So find out about shared traditions and values of the cultural group that you might be working with a member of. Attitude, develop a level of awareness in yourself, myself, and our clients with respect to stereotypes, rules of interaction and communication, customs. And I think that it's an ongoing thing to develop a skill set to increase our cultural competency, such as, especially, I should say, focusing on communication and conflict resolution. So cultural competence requires consistency and practice. It's not something that will always come naturally. Ask questions, learn what the answers mean in different cultures. Use clear, descriptive communication. Keep an open mind. Be aware of situations in which you may portray a lack of sensitivity, and it's really okay to say, please share with me what your culture would view this. I do that. If I don't know, I'm not going to assume. And seek out colleagues and peers of different cultures to learn more about interacting and respecting differences. I think one of the wonderful things about our community is that we are all here to learn from each other. And I think that is really, really wonderful. And I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I haven't left anything out. Nope. So here's the key takeaway I hope that you have from today is just your level of cultural awareness and mindfulness of your own, of my own, our own implicit biases help us modify our behaviors to respond to the needs of others while we maintain a professional level of respect, objectivity, and identity. So it's an ongoing process. And I do really thank you again for this listening to my presentation on this. And I will leave this up so that you can see, in fact, the NACAC conference is right at the top.
Perfect.
And then, yeah, and then I also wrote the Higher Education, HECA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Institute.
I attended that. I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
It was
wasn't it
really
great?
useful. Yes, it was.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And IECA also does a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Intensive. Very, very excellent as well. And then there are some books that if you'd like. So I will leave this here. Oh, no, actually, should I stop sharing for the question and answer? Do we have any?
While the questions are coming in, thank you so much, Kazue. That was super, super helpful. And you know, it's ironic because just yesterday I was working with one of my pro bono students, and we were looking through college websites, helping him prepare information to share with the community-based organization he works with. And during that on one college website, I realized pretty quickly that he didn't know what a dry campus was. I didn't know what Greek life was and didn't know what office hours were. And I wasn't surprised by that. So I was prepared for that. But just, you know, being aware that, you know, to your point, lacking that sort of cultural and familial capital that others of our students come to us with. That's really important.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very good point.
Yeah. Questions? I think Carmen is putting together the questions.
You did such a great job. So far, I don't see any questions.
Well, that's fine with me.
So I have a question. So if you're, you know, you talk about, if you go back on your slide point, you say about being like culturally sensitive and asking people, like, what are some of the signals that we could pick up on that we're not being culturally competent and sensitive?
When I have a student, and of course, Zoom has really changed some of that, but when I have a student who won't look at me directly, you know, in my eyes, then I already know right there, it's a big sign that in that student's culture, it's impolite to stare at the adult's face or eyes. So it's a signal a little bit, and I'll just kind of ease into everything. And of course, they would never call me, you know, my first name, Kazue. If anything, maybe after 2 years, they'll call me Miss Kazue.
Right.
but I'm a Mrs. McGregor to a lot of students from those families. But I think body language says a lot. And so therefore the Zoom makes it a little bit more difficult. And I also know that when parents are not there, students are much more
open.
Yeah, Americanized.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well.
Yeah. So I usually have a meeting with the parents also, or at least have a questionnaire. So I get the idea where they stand. And if they're telling me that they want their child to be near home or even live at home, and I have to explain to them, well, there are some colleges that require you to have that first year living experience. So we'll have to research those colleges that meet those requirements, including no first year living experience. I notice more and more colleges and universities are waiving that. Used to be that it was a requirement, and I don't know
especially
if it has to do
for
with
close
cost.
by within like a radius, within a certain radius.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So are there any other questions, Carmen, before I ask my next one?
No, go ahead.
No. So have you ever been in a situation where you realize, like, after the fact that you've offended somebody because of some cultural miscommunication? And if so, can you describe it and tell us how you dealt with it?
Yeah, let me think, because I think it was it was the mental health. It was not David's family.
Okay.
It was a situation where they were Chinese American family. The parents were both educated here. I mean, they were both very, very Americanized. However, they had grandparents on both sides still living. And so the name of the college was extremely important. And it didn't matter. I could talk till I was blue in the face, but it was very important. And unfortunately, their child had been diagnosed with quite a bit of learning disabilities. Bright student. And I was trying to direct them towards colleges that had a robust, full-paying
LD
program,
support.
LD support. At one point, I was even discussing places like Mansfield Hall or College Living Experience, so that executive functioning that wasn't quite there yet. I mean, was she able to get up and get to class? Was she able to go to her meetings?
Right. I'm working with one of those now. Yep.
Okay. And that is hard. That was very, very hard because they were offended. There's no ifs and buts. It was an 8 months process where I just had to keep educating them. We finally came up on a small list of colleges, and as it turned out, they came to the realization themselves that I guess no, this student was not ready to go across the country to the East Coast, which I could have told them on the first day. But I wanted the parents to come to that realization, and then they just started to come down. And anyway, without revealing any more details, I will just simply say that I think education and building trust are
probably
the keys.
And would you add patience? I think I would.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that comes with the territory.
Right, it does. That doesn't come naturally to me, but it's something that I feel like in these types of situations I have to really step back and be patient.
And it takes more time. I mean, I think I did more communication and more research and back and forth with that one family than probably all my families put together that year.
But what a great learning opportunity, right? I really
Absolutely.
like when I have these complex situations. I know sometimes people get antsy about that because of all the time, but think of all the valuable information that you learned.
Absolutely.
I have another question if nobody else does, Carmen. So in your definition of culture on the first page, and that's a definition I'm familiar with, how would you consider, we go back to it, that would be great. I thought about this in the beginning, but I didn't want to interrupt you. A group of national, racial, ethnic, religious, geographic, age-related, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think we could put learning disabled or neurodivergent into that?
I don't see why not. These were taken from an official definition of what is cultural competency. But, I think that you're absolutely right.
To speak that language and sensitively, because people can get offended.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think what it boils down to is being sensitive, being aware, being mindful. I mean, and that boils down to almost everything that we do in our work.
Absolutely.
Right. And like I said at the beginning, there's so much rich material that's available, and I only drew on a small slice, and I really appreciate everybody just sharing that slice with me today. And
have you ever taken one of those unconscious biases tests or quizzes? And if you have, do you recommend them?
I have not, and I would love to hear from someone who has. So
I have.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Has anybody in the group taken one of those? Like okay, good. They are eye-opening. Anybody feel brave enough to share their results? They are very eye-opening. I think it's a healthy reality check for all of us, because maybe we're not as bias-free as we like to think. In fact, we're probably not. But, that's part of being human, and attending things like this with Kazue and hearing other people's experiences really helps us. I don't know the name of the assessment, but I'll look it up and I'll make sure that gets to you. I'll get it to Carmen and make sure it gets to you. I don't know off the top of my head. I took it during one of my graduate programs.
Oh,
eye-opener.
Yes. I'm now finally getting around to reading the chat.
Life-changing eye-opener. Like, I was glad that I took it when I did. So that would be really worth doing.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you so much,
We're
everybody.
coming towards the end.
Yes.
Any final comments, takeaways, advice for us, Kazue?
Not really. I'm just now reading all the chats, and I'm just so in awe and honored to be in this presence with you, and so many of you, all of you actually. If I I respect your work so much. I learn from you every time I have a conversation with you, and today I learned from Kathy. So I don't really have anything else to say other than I think we just continue our work, and I'm going to stop sharing just so that we can say goodbye. But this was a thank you very much, Kathy. I really appreciated your questions.
And thank you, Cyndy, as always. I know Cyndy's not here, but gosh, props to Cyndy. She is a wellspring, a fountain of information. She is so knowledgeable and helpful. Anybody that's been in her CEP prep group, that for me was like a super motivating experience. Big plug for her there.